Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to make a spread of blue doodles. You seem to enjoy the doodle spread that I posted last year, so I decided to create a blue version. For the first one, I want to doodle some leaves, just because it's my go-to thing to mindlessly doodle. But before we start, I'm going to mask off the edges of my sketchbook because I like the frame to look for this, and just for fun, I use different colored washi tape because colors make me happy. Since I'm masking off the whole spread, it's much easier to keep everything in place with some clips so it can open completely without the pages moving. Next, let's go over the colors and some tools for both of the doodles. Firstly, this is Gray of Gray by Holbein, Indigo by Schmincke, Ultramarine Finest by Schmincke, Cobalt Green by Holbein, Azure Blue by Roman Schmal, and Permanent Yellow Deep by Holbein. For the reds, I initially used Crimson Lake, but for the second doodle, though I stuck with the Crimson Lake, I find that using Vermilion would create a nicer, more bright orange, so just keep it in mind as you're painting the second doodle. I'm also going to add some gold accents with my Finetec Gold. And of course, for white details, I'm going to use Bleedproof White by Dr. P.H. Martins. I'm also going to add some pen details, and for this I'm going to use my Snowman drawing pen. The weight is 0.05, and this Stabilo pen number 68, and this happened to just be right in front of me as I was painting, and I felt like the color would go with the second doodle, which is why I decided to use it. Now let's start with the first doodle. I'm going to fill the whole page with clumps of blue leaves. I like using different tones made from mixtures of the colors I have here, and I like to also play with the values, so some are very light whereas other leaves are dark as accents. I started with a mixture of Gray and Azure Blue, and as you can see, by playing with the ratio, I can create different tones already just with those two colors. Then I start introducing some Ultramarine Finest as well to create another tone of blue. After painting a few leaves, I'm going to connect them all together. I've also switched to my Dagger brush here, which comes to a very fine point, and I'm using a thick consistency of indigo to connect all the leaves to the main stem. Since the main stem is fairly long, I'm going to add another one branching out. Then I'm going to add the leaves surrounding this one as well. Feel free to also add on other colors. Here I started introducing the cobalt green as well. After painting on some leaves, I decided to use a bit of indigo to branch out another stem. And this time I'm thinking of adding berries instead of leaves, and I'm going to use warm colors to complement the blues. There's still a bit of space here, so I'm going to add small leaves as well. Don't be scared to play around with the size of the leaves as well as the shapes of the leaves if you have any other ideas. These are just the shapes that I had in mind as I was doodling at this time. For the berries here, I'm going to use a mix of Permanent Yellow Deep and Crimson Lake. For some parts, I like using the orange mixture, and for some berries, I like to just use Crimson Lake by itself. And I'm just painting them next to each other while the surface is still damp, so I'm letting the paint naturally blend within the damp surface. From the leaves that I'm painted, I'm going to extend the stem further and create another branch. Then for the leaves, just like before, you can play around with different color mixtures and consistencies as well. On the right hand side here, I decided to add some round leaves just for the sake of it, to try it out and see how it goes with the composition. If I like it, I like it. If I don't, it's also okay since this is just a doodle. For all of the leaves, I decided to paint them all more or less in the same general direction, but feel free to also make another main stem growing from any corner of the page as well if you feel like trying it out. After painting a few more leaves, there's a nice space in the middle here, so I decided to add more berries. I'm going to paint it the same way with a mix of Permanent Yellow Deep and Crimson Lake to create a deep orange, and pair this with Crimson Lake by itself for deep red berries as well. As I was painting this, I also want to leave out white dots for each berry that I paint as highlights. From here, I'm just going to repeat the same leaves and berries until I fill the whole space. I like to also go back to areas where the leaves are completely dry and add some transparent overlapping leaves on top, just for the fun of it. Here I was still curious about the round leaves, so I gave it another go. But yeah, I still prefer the normal leaves. Feel free to just add other elements to yours as well whenever you feel like it. Just relax with this doodle and let your brush and your mind wander and play with different shapes. I'm going to paint the last bunch of berries here. Then after that, I'm going to still add on a few more leaves. But I didn't realize that my brush was still contaminated with a little bit of Permanent Yellow Deep. So when I mixed it with the light blues that I had on my palette, it came to this really nice light muted sage green. And I really like it, so I decided to use this green and spread it here and there in the composition for a little bit of color accent. I also felt like the colors were generally too light, so I'm going to go over some of the darker leaves again and layer a thicker consistency for more contrast in the whole composition. I still feel like I need more accent colors, so I'm going to paint on some little dots in different sizes using the orange mixture from Permanent Yellow Deep and Crimson Lake. I'm just spreading this out in some spaces that I can spot, and then after this I'm going to add more textural components to this doodle by adding on the veins and details for some of the leaves. At first I used the thick consistency of indigo with my dagger brush to paint on some of the details of the leaf, but I felt like the bristles were a bit too long for me to control the lines in such a tight space, and it felt a bit too tedious, so I decided to add the details using pen. I still like the look of the indigo on top of the light blues though, so I tried it again with my size 0 brush. By the way, you can play around with the pattern you paint on the leaves, but I'm just going to keep mine simple because I quite like what's going on already with the blues and the red berries. For a final touch, I just want to add some shimmers with my gold paint, and I feel like the gold looks better on the dark leaves because it has more contrast. Lastly, I'm going to add extra shimmers by adding random brush strokes spread out on the page using a thick consistency of gold. And that's it for the first doodle. Let's move on to the second one. The second one was actually unplanned completely. Initially, I just wanted to paint rows of different tones of blues, so I'm going to use the mixtures that I've used to paint the leaves to create these rows. I also don't want to worry about straight lines, so I just made them wavy, and I'm also going to play with the thickness. And in between the colors, I left out a thin white space so the paint won't just blend into each other. If you want them to travel though, I think it might also look nice. You can play around by touching some of the paint together to see how it works. Once I filled the page, I'm going to add the muted light green, like what I use for the final touches of the leaves, and I'm going to place them on the white space in between the wavy blue rows. After that, I was kind of confused where I want to go with this doodle. I felt like adding some orange, just like the berries, as accents, but since watercolor is transparent, the orange painted on top will just turn brown. So I used bleed proof white to paint some ovals randomly in different sizes, and I'm going to treat this as a base for the oranges. If you saw the preview at the beginning or the thumbnail, you'll see that I'll turn these into little fishes, but I didn't know it at this stage, so I just painted ovals. However, you can also use bleed proof white to paint other fish shapes as well. Since this is a doodle though, I don't mind keeping everything simple. Also, because the blue is quite vibrant, you kind of need to put a thick consistency of bleed proof white to cover it. Or, since you already know that these are going to be little fishes, you can also leave the white off the paper by covering it with masking fluid before painting on the blue wavy lines. Once the white is dried, I use permanent yellow deep and crimson lake in different ratios to paint the ovals, but you can see that the orange looks a bit muddy for my liking, and for this I would suggest for you to replace the crimson lake with vermilion instead for a more vibrant orange. And here I also added some smaller gold ovals with single short brush strokes. Just like the leaves, once everything is completely dry, I felt like the value is a bit too similar all across the page, so I decided to darken some of the lines. Here I was looking at my table to see what medium I can use and found this marker. I think this is water-based though, and I felt like the color will go well with the other blues, so I started doodling on top of the blue waves with it. I want to also add some darker blue doodles, so I picked up the paint that I've already premixed on my palette and start doodling with it. Feel free to also doodle on the white spaces as well. Honestly, I really didn't know what I was doing at this point. I didn't even know where I wanted to go with the yellow ovals yet. I was just making random marks for fun. I decided to add some doodles with my pen as well, and since the line weight is very thin, I drew more detailed doodles, and after that, that's when I decided to turn these ovals into fishes. At first I just painted eyes to see what it looks like, then once I can imagine them, I added the fins and the tails using a thick consistency of indigo. For some of the larger fishes, I like to add some small details like the scales and things as well, but later felt like the lines were too thick if I used my brush, so I tried using my pen. I'm just keeping mine simple, but you can add other designs or even different fish shapes for yours as well. I felt a bit better once I figured out I wanted to turn the ovals into fishes because I feel like it just brought the doodle together nicely, and I'm just going to keep adding more doodles wherever I feel like I can add to. Once I'm done, I'm going to unmask the sides and reveal the doodles. And before I finish off, let me just show you an example of what the fish will look like with the mixture of vermilion and permanent yellow deep instead of the crimson lake. The colors are just a little bit more vibrant, which makes a nice contrast with the blue background. I'm going to add the eyes and the fins, and that's basically it for these blue doodles. I hope you found this one relaxing to watch and paint along to. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Like usual, the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye!